Welcome to Sometimes Love Isn't Enough, the Parenting Through Challenges podcast. And I am your host, Angie Grant, generational healing specialist. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about this podcast and you, the parent who listens and is trying to make change in your home. And I think a lot about the title of this podcast, right? Sometimes love isn't enough. When I first created the podcast, it was solely an adoption podcast. I'm an adoptive mom, in case you haven't picked up on that through the stories that I've told. But those words, sometimes love isn't enough, are words that were said to me when I was struggling so very much with my son. And man, I just loved the heck out of him. And yet I was struggling so much. I would cry myself to sleep at night because I couldn't understand where things were going wrong in my one of my most important relationships in my life. And those words hurt at the time, right? Sometimes love just isn't enough. And I would think, but why can't it be? Why can't love be enough to help this boy who has been through really tricky things? Why can't love be enough for your most important relationships? Why does it have to be so hard? Well, this podcast has evolved over the past couple of years. I think it's been a couple of years now that I've been recording. Well, I just released, I think, the 104th episode. So, yeah, I think that was the mark of 2 years, actually. If I do the math, and I have not yet skipped a week. So it's evolved quite a bit. It started as an adoption podcast, really helping adoptive parents to look at different ways of viewing their relationship. And then it evolved to really using mindset tools or sharing mindset tools with parents who are struggling to connect with their kids. And then more recently, it's evolved to really using a tool like human design to help you to connect even more deeply with your kiddo. So I was thinking earlier this week, is this title still true to me and to the way that I'm supporting you? So that's what I want to chat about today. I want to chat about, where I'm at with that, where this is showing up in my relationships, and as a bit of a recentering for me, for you, for the work that we're doing here. I'm thinking about some upcoming episodes, and I really want to dig into why, for right parents like yourself, like myself, why it is so incredibly hard to make the changes that we want to in our life. But today we're going to talk about this concept that sometimes love isn't enough. When I think about, when I describe to people what my podcast is about, I still hold true that as parents, when we love our kids so deeply, but we don't have the right tools to show up for them, it can be incredibly challenging when our kids come to us with their own challenges. I think about my son. I haven't talked a ton about his design actually, and I didn't actually plan on going there today, but just as I'm talking, I I keep going back to my loved ones' designs and really trying to understand them more and more, the deeper that I dig into human design. And what I've noticed about my son's chart is that, right, he came to our family with a really tricky past. He was 5.5 when we adopted him, and it he had been through some stuff at that point. So I anticipated that his journey would be challenging. And so, in my anticipation of that, I dug deep into knowing everything I could possibly know about trauma, about attachment, about other diagnoses that I was told that he had. I dug in deep to understanding not just understanding the diagnoses, but understanding what do I get to do to show up for him? How can I connect best with him with all of this knowledge that I have? And I believe that I'm a quick study, right? I learn something and I integrate it. This is why I excelled in the autism field that I worked in for a couple of decades. I would quickly learn the skills that I needed to and would take feedback and implement it and shift what I was doing so that I could continue to show up for kids who were different than me, had different needs than me. But with my son, it still wasn't quite enough. There were so, and that's an understatement. With my son and all that I knew about how to support him, it was almost as if by me doing what I knew, it made things harder in our relationship. It was almost as if by loving him and trying to show up for him with what I knew, it created more tension in our relationship. In some ways, I think that perhaps it caused him to believe that he was broken or that there was something wrong with him because I parented him differently than I did my daughter. And I know most kids need different types of parenting, but in our dynamic in our relationship, I mean, I will never know for certain. I've had conversations with him more recently about, when he was younger, but his story is his story. And I don't get, I don't I won't ever really truly know what his experience was. But what I believe is that in my desperate attempt to do better, be better, help him, I made things worse. And if I'm being really honest with myself, it wasn't just that I wanted to be better for him, it's that I wanted to resolve his suffering, what I perceived to be his suffering, which came out in behaviors. I was desperate to not have the behaviors in our home. I was desperate to um, have him avoid feeling discomfort or distress or disconnection. And in doing so, I ultimately pushed him away for many years. And it's been work to rebuild that relationship. I hold true still today that that concept that sometimes love isn't enough is still true and still very much the undercurrent of this podcast, right? And I still hold true that sometimes love isn't enough and we need the right tools. I first started for myself really digging into mindset concepts, things that I had never heard before, or at least had never sunk in a way that I made sense of them. The idea that I have full responsibility for my thoughts and feelings was mind blowing to me. To realize that no matter what was happening outside of me, I am the only one who gets to control how I react to that, how I show up for whatever's happening in life. I don't get to control the things outside of me, but I have the power to choose how I think and feel. I had no concept of that, even being a highly intelligent parent, professional, all the things. So that was my first step in really expanding what I knew and really then sharing those practical tools here to help shift the way that you are thinking about your relationship with your kiddos, helping you take full responsibility for your own thoughts and feelings and also surrendering your responsibility for theirs. Because as I was saying about my son, even if he tells me his side of our relationship, he may still be withholding parts of it because he's human. And sometimes it feels vulnerable to fully share what we're thinking or what we're feeling. And so he gets full ownership of his thoughts and feelings. But often as parents, we take on that responsibility, as I did, that idea that I don't want this to happen because I don't want my child to feel sad or upset or distressed or whatever it might be. And well, yes, it's our duty to protect our kids from danger. It's not our duty to protect them from feeling. And I think in my desperate attempt to try to help my son That's exactly what I did. I tried so desperately to try to protect him from feeling anything challenging, right? But it didn't, my learning, my growth didn't stop there. I then started digging into human design, and I have spent the last several years really deeply understanding myself. And I still feel like I've just barely scratched the surface of what my energetic needs are. And this is what I do. I've been through so many certifications and trainings and classes and workshops, and I share this with my clients. And I offer workshops about these concepts, and I'm constantly talking about all things human design. And yet I still feel like I've barely scratched the surface of myself. So I will occasionally go back and, pull up my kids' charts and under in my partner's chart and really understand them a little bit deeper each time. The other day I don't know, I had this intuitive hit to grab my son's chart and just look at it again. Nothing's gone wrong, nothing has been happening in our relationship, but something that stood out to me this time that I I knew before, but I didn't really understand before. But so my son has something called a triple split, which means that he has several of his centers defined. That in and of itself means that he puts a lot of energy into our relationship. I have a lot of open centers. So I have three defined and he has three open, meaning I have six open and he has six defined centers. And that in and of itself, right, in our relationship, I am learning about him through his energy, the energy that he puts into our space. And two of his undefined centers are two of my defined centers, right? So there's definitely a match there. We both have an open root. So lots of pressure going on there. But that in and of itself explains so much to me about how I felt in our relationship. I would feel this pressure to do better, to be better, to prove myself as his mom. And he has a defined will center. In fact, one of his most important gates is in his defined will center. And mine's wide open. And so that pressure to prove myself as his mom was a real energetic pressure that I felt. But he also has something called a triple split, like I said. And a triple split means that those six centers that he has are in kind of two centers in one island, two centers in another island, two centers in another island, which can create the space where he's energetically seeking connection, seeking to feel what it feels like to have his energy really flowing. And so that energetic dynamic in him may have created this space where it felt unsettled to me. I don't have that experience, right? But being around him may have created this space of feeling unsettled or trying trying to connect in ways that didn't feel comfortable to me. And I think the most compelling thing that I noticed the other day is that so my son has three channels or strengths in his design. And all three of his channels have the four gates that are in my incarnation cross. So, what does that mean? Well, my incarnation cross, none of my gates are connected to its corresponding channel. So, none of my four most important energies in my chart are connected to its kind of its partner. But my son has both ends of three of the four of my most important gates, meaning his energy has the ability to overpower my energy. He also has the gate of the fighter. So when I put all of those things together and look back on our experiences, it makes so much more sense, right? His energy was overpowering my most important four gates. He has this energy of the gate of the fighter, which is also his most important energy in his chart. And he he has this split, which can create this dynamic with somebody who doesn't have a split. It can create this dynamic of him feeling like he's trying to connect, trying to get his energy flowing. And that perhaps to me felt desperate and uncomfortable. I don't know. And I'm not saying that he was desperate. I'm saying that the energy that he put into our relationship could have had that dynamic. So as I reflect back, think about this concept of sometimes love isn't enough. It oftentimes isn't. And I'm not saying that your love isn't enough for your kiddos. I'm not saying that your love doesn't matter. Not at all. I have such deep love for my son, and still our relationship was so incredibly hard. And there was so much tension in our relationship, even though I know that all along he loved me and I love him. But for years, there was so much tension in our relationship that I didn't know how to get past that. I think, my gosh, if I had known human design 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and had really started to understand these concepts, how I could have shown up for him so very differently. So when I say that, sometimes love isn't enough, and that my purpose here with this podcast is to really bring you practical things that you can do in your relationships. This is a huge part of it. Sometimes it is a really key practical mindset concept with a tool that you can implement. Today, what I really want to share is that when we can see our kids at an energetic level and then know what to do about it, it helps us show up in such a different way. If I had known, just as a simple example, that he had this energy called the gate of the fighter and what can really come with that, well, it's not a bad gate. None of them are bad. None of them are good or bad. All of the energies are neutral, but they can, when we're in this stress state, this fight or flight state, it can be on the shadow side. And that gate of the fighter on the shadow side is a fighter. But when it's in its gift side, it is an excellent advocate and can really fight for good, for themselves, for humanity. But it sure didn't come out that way in our relationship because, well, he was in a stress state because of our relationship and because of his past and because of, what was happening, right? Had I known that then, had I known then what I know about the nervous system and how, practical tools to help, but also knowing energetically what he really needed from me and how perhaps sometimes just getting out of his space was all that I needed to not feel so overpowered by his energy. He wasn't doing anything to overpower me, but my nervous system sure did pick it up that way. So, at the end of this podcast, what I really want to say is, yeah, I love the name and I want to stick with it because I think that it perfectly embodies all of the evolutions that have happened here in this podcast. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, right? What are your thoughts about that idea of sometimes love isn't enough? And sometimes we really do need practical tools that are aligned with us and aligned with our kids. So, that's it for today. I do have an amazing, um, I have two free charts on my website, one for you, one for your kiddos. And then when you really want to start digging deeper, I have a paid chart. It helps you understand not only your resiliency keys, your health and wellness, all those things as it relates to your human design. And I'd love to talk with you about it. So stop by my website, grab your charts, grab your reports, and when you're ready, I'd love to talk to help you really start implementing these things that we talk about in your most important relationships. That is all for this episode. Until next time, be well.